Hi there. In this lecture we see Bobby Fischer playing against Mikhail Tal, who they both became really good friends with each other, in fact. And this is in the 1962 Curacao Candidates Tournament, round 11. There's actually a story of Fischer visiting Tal when Tal was in hospital. It was very nice of Fischer, and yeah, they were good buddies. So here, e4 from Fischer, we see Tal playing Sicilian defense. Knight f3, knight c6, d4, c takes, knight takes d4, e5. We see knight b5, and now a6. Personally, I don't like this variation. I think this is a poorer alternative to the Sicilian Sveshnikov modern move order, which is knight f6, where you're hitting this pawn. It's not good to play knight d6 check here, because black takes and then takes on e4. And so basically, after protecting with knight 1 to c3, d6, the Sicilian Sveshnikov often runs like this. And white has two main choices, knight d5 or bishop takes f6. In this variation, it is a variation of the Sicilian, but white gets a dark square bishop here after knight d6, bishop takes, queen takes. Black does get some energetic queen movements, looking at e4 and g2. Fischer plays here knight c3. We have knight g e7. And now a key move, which is actually a very, very good theoretical move as well, h4, to try and drive the queen away, that cheeky queen. And after h5, we now have bishop g5, very good. d5, energetic. But here, a slight opening in inaccuracy, it seems, from Bobby Fischer. It seems as though white doesn't need to fear e takes d5. Even though the queen's looking at c2, if knight d4, bishop d3, this situation, bishop takes, queen takes, white can just castle here. Black would be in very, very big trouble if they played knight takes c2 here, because after f4, this knight is being undermined on d4. This is just a huge position, a huge advantage for white. So yeah, it seems as though this is a very accurate way of playing it, e takes d5. If we just look at this again, instead of queen takes f5, if knight e takes f5, queen d3, and then actually we can sack g2 and castle queenside. This is also very nice for white. So something for the opening repertoire here against this variation. But here, yeah, we see, unfortunately, I mean, it doesn't give white in theory that much. Bishop takes e7, giving up this bishop. Because of d4, very, very strong move d4 especially. Knight takes e7 is also, you know, white's got a small edge here. But d4, this is a strong move. And actually after bishop g5, d takes, white's structure is a bit wrecked. And after queen takes e4, you know, black doesn't stand much worse here at all. The bishop drops back here. f6, I mean, is a good move. And there's also, you know, bishop f5 as well is a good move. Black should be standing well here. What black doesn't want to do is queen takes g2, because then bishop f3 traps the queen, and this, okay, just loses a piece for black. So anyway, black's in great shape here, it seems. In general, f6, bishop e3, bishop g4 is played, queen d3, and now a bit of a let-off. Mikhail Tal kind of straightens out Fischer's pawns for him, does him a favour. Better than queen takes d3. It seems queen f5, if f3, e4, for example, this situation loses for black, but there is another variation I did mean to tell you, not that one. Here, well, in this line, instead of bishop takes f3, black has rook d8. With rook d8, this is key, and now queen d5, and black's doing fine. Yeah, just as long as black doesn't lose a piece in a dumb manner. Okay, in a silly manner. So anyway, in game continuation though, Mikhail Tal straightened out Fischer's pawns. But nevertheless, it seems as though it's a bit scary with the king in the center for a moment, at least. This situation looks as though there's pressure points and the rooks are active. This pawn is protected. We have the rook swinging across, and this rook swings across. f5. But now, you know, these pawns are starting to be on dark squares. And sometimes, and Tal's done this in endgames as well himself, when there's pawns of a certain colour, sometimes the king can walk on the other colour, you know, those dark square weaknesses. Watch out for them here. If black doesn't commit to f5, rook d7 seems as though it should be even, perfectly even. But with f5, slight concession on the dark squares. A king could make inroads in theory on these dark squares. We see bishop g5. And now rook d7, not bothering with this discovered check business. If the discovered check, king f3, and the king's, you know, ready to start walking up the board. And here c takes, this is an even position. The knight is covering f4 at the moment anyway, it's even. But here, you know, rook d7, we have d takes e5, rook takes, king f3, rook e4, rook d3, rook c4, rook cd1, which is a fascinating move. It's a really fascinating tactical move because it looks as though, isn't black like really comfortable with the knight? It's a really interesting tactical move. It's essentially it's a positional pawn sacrifice to get the king making even more inroads on the dark squares. At the moment, the guardian angel of the f4 square is the f4, is that knight looking at f4. Now with this, it's a pawn sack. It's a positional pawn sack. We see rook takes c3. Tal goes for this. And now, you know, rook takes, and the point is revealed soon, rook c1, and now a key forcing move. Bishop f4. And now here, rook c6 was played. If rook c5 was played, after bishop d2, we actually see the full effect of the pawn sack, that actually white's doing very well here with king f4. Pawn sack to liberate the king. And that's hitting f5. And this situation is very bad for black. Otherwise the king's just making inroads, you know, with king g5 there, if g6. So it's interesting. We see rook c6, bishop e5, knight d5. So the knight's standing guard again on f4. But now Fischer tries to kick it away, rook d1. If he does take, leaving the knight on d5, this is actually just even, this position. So rook d1, high precision, and the knight is encouraged to move away now. We see knight f6 shielding the g7 pawn. But now the inroad is made, king f4. This is a very, very dangerous king. The king is often a fighting piece in endgames. And here Fischer a pawn down. But this situation with all these pawns on light squares and white's bishop and the king is very, very dangerous now. We see f3 restricting that knight. This is part of the process quite often of Fischer winning these bishop versus knight endgames. And the king's got that lovely g5 square to go to. But first bishop d6. And that shields g6, so making this even more effective to hit g6. Protecting, this one doesn't matter about this as much because there's actually a fast queening pawn here. If these two can be taken out, this pawn's ready. Rook e2 was tried, king g5, rook e6, trying to defend. Bishop f4, knight f8. But now rook d6, trying to break open the f6 square. But also now king h6 with the threat of king g7. We have rook e2. Rook d2. After rook e2, this would have been bad to have played king g7 here actually. Fischer avoids this little trap because of knight e6 check. And then knight takes here. And this is even. So rook d2. We have rook e7. Bishop d6. Check. The king goes back for a moment. Rook f7. Is white making progress? Rook b2. Now here the strain is felt all around the board. You know, with ideas of rook b5 sometimes after taking the knight. These are dangerous ideas. to get the pawn back. And we see a desperate looking move, f4, giving back a key pawn. Fischer takes this, check, king h6, b5. So that was the key points. Deprive white of the b5 square. That was one of the key points anyway. Bishop d6, b4. And now g4. We see rook takes f3, g5. This pawn is making advances to be a future queen. Knight e6. King takes g6. Yes, things are starting to break now in the black position. King f5. And now this is a very, very dangerous pass pawn. Future queen is emerging here. Check. And now g6 taking another step. And here it looks as though, hold on, as Fischer just blundered a piece. No, he anticipated this. g7. This works tactically very well. We see rook takes f4 check. If knight takes f4, then king e4. And yeah, the pawn's going to be queening. So rook takes f4, but this is hopeless as well, king e5. We see rook f8, desperate. The exchange down now. King d5. And with the exchange down, it's pretty grim. It's lost. In fact, a3 is played here. Daring to play a3, not dissolving there. b2. And we see now check and rook b7. That picks up. Sorry, after a3, Mikhail Tal actually resigned. If it continued with b2, as an example, then rook e7 check and rook b7 picks up the pawn. But also, it's difficult here. What else? If king d8, then this threatens checkmate. And here, rook f6. And what does black do here? So if the knight moves, there's rook f8 checkmate. And if here, we'd still just take here because we're going to be checkmating. So yeah, a cute little finish there with Fischer playing that subtle little move. a3. By the way, in case you're wondering here, what if the knight doesn't move? What if the king goes back? Because it looks a bit scary, right, this passed pawn here. In fact, here, check and rook a7 will do. So we're gaining a key tempo again for this checkmate. It's great when we have the opposition. Sometimes we're just checkmating the opponent's king. And here this gives a key tempo which we can use to snap off this pawn and make this trivially winning after rook b4. So yeah, key point there, if king d8, if you did want to ask that, good question. So in this position, rather. So we've looked at knight g6, but the question here was if king e8, we just play check to get this opposition again, and then we've got this mate threat, yeah, which gives us a key tempo. It wins that pawn. Okay, something to bear in mind as another instructive point of this game. Okay. Yeah, it's a bit of a zugzwang there. So yeah, a very cute game. There are a lot of instructive points. In one of my favourite chess books, which had instructive games, Chernev's Most Instructive Games of Chess, he actually had a Tal king walk in an endgame across dark squares. So Tal actually used this mechanism of being very adventurous in the endgame across dark squares, which had been, weakened earlier with pawns on light squares. Here we see Fischer giving up a whole pawn earlier to get this king march with fantastic threats of infiltration with the king, and then getting the pawns up ready to get a candidate queen, and then it becomes a pass pawn. I thought it was a very instructive effort here, and shows why Fischer is to be feared in these endgames when Fischer has the bishop against the opponent's knights, why Fischer's so devastating. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that as much as me. Thanks very much. Hi guys, if you enjoyed this video lecture, you might want to get more at my course, Kingscrusher TV/Bobby Fischer, which I had a blast creating, over 25 hours of video content. I tried to get the most instructive juice out of every single game covered and picking the most important games from this period. I had an absolute blast creating it, and I think you'll have an absolute blast checking it out. And it's at a big discount code with this link, you know, Kingscrusher TV/Bobby Fischer has the discount code. So I hope you do check that out. Thanks very much.